A destitute girl mistakenly boarded the incorrect tube and found herself in an affluent neighborhood, where she rescued a stranger who was, in fact, a millionaire in disguise. You are deceiving. You possess no domicile to which you can return, do you? The officer's tone was incisive, his gaze narrowed with distrust. Celine remained motionless on the immaculate sidewalk, her hands quivering as she grasped the straps of her tattered rucksack. I became disoriented. She mumbled, her voice almost perceptible. I am attempting to navigate my way back home. Residence? The officer derided, observing her unkempt appearance. Absence of identification, address, and contacts. You're being dishonest. You lack a domicile to which you can return, do you not? Celine's eyes brimmed with tears, although she resolutely withheld them. She had encountered more severe challenges than this. By the age of 22, she had mastered the art of concealing her anguish and obscuring her weaknesses. Raised in foster care, she was often relocated from one household to another, never genuinely belonging any place. Currently employed night shifts at a decrepit diner in the city's most perilous district, she scarcely earned sufficient income to meet her rent for a dilapidated flat. That morning, after a taxing double shift, Celine boarded the tube, planning to return home. Fatigued, she had fallen asleep, only to awaken in a strange, affluent neighborhood. The streets were pristine, and the buildings were high and flawless. She had never witnessed such grandeur in proximity. Devoid of funds on her transit card and with her phone battery down, Celine commenced strolling, aspiring to locate a recognizable landmark or a tube station. While she roamed, she observed an elderly man collapse on the pavement ahead. A multitude of elegantly attired individuals passed by, some offering fleeting glances, however none halted. Without delay, Celine hastened to the man's side. "Sir, can you hear me?" she said softly, shaking his shoulder. No response was received. She assessed his pulse. It was feeble, yet detectable. A minor puddle of blood was accumulating beneath his skull. "Call an ambulance," she exclaimed, surveying her surroundings. Individuals persisted in passing by, evading eye contact. Exasperated, Celine retrieved her phone, only to recall that it was inoperative. She observed a nearby cafe and entered swiftly. "I require the use of your phone. A man has collapsed outside," she implored. The barista paused momentarily before relinquishing the phone to her. Celine promptly contacted emergency personnel, supplying the location and pertinent facts. She returned to the man and applied moderate pressure to the wound on his head using her scarf. "Assistance is forthcoming," she murmured. Shortly thereafter, an ambulance arrived, accompanied by 2 police officers. While the paramedics attended to the man, a cop approached Celine. "Did you observe the occurrence?" he inquired. "I discovered him in this state and summoned assistance," she responded. The officer regarded her with skepticism. "Do you possess identification?" Celine negated with a shake of her head. "I misplaced my wallet." "What is your name?" "Celine." "Celine what?" "Merely Celine." The officer's demeanor became stern. "You are deceiving. You possess no domicile to which to return, do you?" Before Celine could reply, a sigh emanated from a stretcher. The elderly man was recovering consciousness. "Sir, are you able to hear me?" inquired a paramedic. The man nodded feebly. "The girl? She assisted me." The officer inquired, directing his attention to Celine, his demeanor altering marginally. "Is that accurate?" Celine affirmed with a nod. The elderly man gazed at her, his eyes brimming with appreciation. "Thank you, dear." As the paramedics readied for his transport, he extended his hand and grasped Celine's. "Kindly accompany me." Celine hesitated, casting a glance at the officer, then expressed, "I wish to extend my gratitude appropriately." "It is acceptable," the man reassured her. Celine, with reluctance, complied and entered the ambulance, taking a seat next to the man as they proceeded to the hospital. Following a comprehensive assessment, the physicians verified that the individual had experienced a mild concussion, but would achieve complete recovery. While resting, he directed his attention to Celine. "I'm Mr. Whitman," he stated. "I reside in close proximity. Upon my discharge, I would like you to visit my residence. It is the least I can offer. Celine attempted to object, but he dismissed her concerns. Absurd. You preserve my existence. 2 days later, Celine stood before an opulent mansion, its gates elaborate and formidable. She inhaled deeply and pressed the bell. A butler opened the door, offering her a cordial greeting. Miss Celine, your arrival has been anticipated. Within, the estate exceeded her expectations of opulence. Every area was embellished with marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and invaluable artwork. Mr. Whitman welcomed her in the parlor. Welcome, esteemed guest. Kindly feel at ease. Celine sat uncomfortably, feeling incongruous amidst the grandeur. I have organized your temporary accommodation here, Mr. Whitman asserted. You require rest, and I insist. Overcome, Celine acquiesced. Thank you. As Celine acclimated to the guest room, she pondered the odd trajectory her life had become. Transitioning from allegations of homelessness to being embraced by a mansion seemed surreal. However, she instinctively saw that this was merely the commencement of a new chapter, characterized by uncertainty, hope, and potentially an opportunity for an improved existence. Celine stood silently at the periphery of the expansive hallway, her fingers entwined with the tattered strap of her worn canvas bag. The atmosphere was redolent of polished timber and fresh blooms, excessively pristine and sophisticated for an individual of her kind. Her gaze trailed the butler as he vanished between elaborate double doors, leaving her solitary in an expanse too vast for silence. A voice pierced the silence from behind. You are the young woman who was present when my granddad collapsed. Celine rotated gradually. A tall man in a sharp navy suit stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his countenance inscrutable. His features were pronounced, prominent, dark eyebrows, a clean-shaven jawline, and a gaze that appeared to perceive excessively. I am Celine, she stated, her tone measured. I was on the street at the time of the incident. I assisted, he advanced nearer. Assisted or perceived a prospect. I did not request to be here, he asserted, to which she responded, her tone composed yet resolute. He squinted, then pivoted and vanished into another chamber. Shortly thereafter, indistinct voices emerged from outside the door. The utterances were unclear, yet the tension was undeniable. A minute elapsed until he reappeared, accompanied by the elderly man whom Celine had saved. The elderly man beamed at Celine. This is my grandson, Daniel, she acknowledged with a slight nod. Daniel scarcely returned it. Later that evening, following a subdued supper during which Daniel never uttered a word to her, Celine found herself seated in the guest bedroom, perceiving herself as an imposter in a dream too lavish for her to inhabit. She saw the luxurious bedding, the gold-trimmed drapes, and the subtle ticking of the vintage clock on the dresser. All about her suggested a realm to which she did not belong. The following day, Mr. Whitman, jovial and loquacious despite his bandaged arm, requested Celine to remain for a few days to recuperate from a shock. She began assisting wherever possible. She observed Maria, the housekeeper's small daughter, timidly gazing at her English vocabulary book. Celine extended her assistance, and by the conclusion of the afternoon, they were both amused by misarticulated idioms and whimsical poetry. That evening, Daniel returned home from a conference to discover Celine seated at the elongated kitchen table, indicating flashcards while Maria laughed alongside her. He paused silently for a moment prior to articulating his thoughts. You appear to be settling in quite comfortably, he remarked nonchalantly. Celine gazed upward undisturbed. Am I merely assisting? She inquired. Daniel acquiesced with a hesitant nod, however remained silent thereafter. He pivoted and departed, his mind shrouded in doubt. He had commenced a background investigation on her. He required knowledge. No individual inadvertently entered their realm without justification. The findings were returned the next day. Absence of parental figures, lack of academic documentation, and absence of a criminal record. An emergency shelter recorded her identity 3 years ago. A single part-time position at a diner. That concludes everything. She possessed no secrets, as there was nothing to conceal. Daniel occupied his study, the report on his desk, with an untouched cup of coffee beside him. She was precisely as she claimed, a girl devoid of possessions and companionship. That evening, he halted as he approached the open doorway of the sitting room. Celine was folding clean towels alongside the maid, smiling softly as she worked, her demeanor comfortable and her words benevolent. The others interacted with her, as though she had always belonged, not as a stranger, but as an individual of significance. During supper that evening, Mr. Whitman laughed at a remark made by Celine and tenderly rested his hand on hers. Daniel recognized the motion, his jaw clenched. Subsequently, while they stood on the rear patio, the sky suffused with twilight, Daniel finally spoke his thoughts. "You possess exceptional interpersonal skills." Celine cast a sidelong glance at him. Is that an accolade or a caution? He elicited the slightest smile, still deliberating. She emitted a soft laugh, then directed her gaze towards her hands. "I am aware of your thoughts. I am present for a purpose. That I seek your grandfather's wealth, benevolence, or whatever affluent individuals presume others desire." Daniel did not refute it. "However, I did not request to remain," she proceeded gently. "If you desire my departure, I shall leave." Daniel paused briefly before stating that he desires your presence. "This suffices for the now." They remained silent, the strain easing sufficiently to allow the night wind to enter. Neither party entirely trusted the other, although an initiation had commenced. Not fully comprehending, not yet forgiving, but possibly the initial fissure in the barrier separating two distinctly divergent realms. The days at the Whitman estate elapsed languidly, and Celine started to perceive that she was navigating a life that did not genuinely belong to her. She provided assistance in several capacities, instructing Maria in English, aiding with minor household jobs, and engaging with Mr. Whitman. His kindness and subtle insight provided her with a sense of security, albeit transient. However, Daniel's chilly, scrutinizing look remained disconcerting whenever he was present. One evening, while Celine conversed with Mr. Whitman about his adolescence, she inadvertently revealed more about herself than she had planned. The dialogue shifted to her history, and before she was aware, her voice quivered with recollections that had been long suppressed. "I have never truly possessed a sense of belonging," she continued gently, her gaze unfocused as she looked out into the yard. "I became an orphan in infancy, raised in an orphanage. The children there shown a lack of concern for one another. I was consistently the final selection for all activities, including games. I suppose I was inadequate for everyone." Mr. Whitman's expression softened as he extended his hand to gently pat hers. "That is a challenging beginning, my dear. However, you're no longer that girl." She compelled a little smile, yet the sorrow persisted in her gaze. "I previously believed I was insignificant, as though I held no value. I consistently sought validation from others to affirm my worth. However, I have come to realize not to anticipate such behavior from anyone. Individuals assist alone when they anticipate a reciprocal benefit." Her voice wavered as she proceeded. "I have been deceived numerous times. Individuals assert their concern, although it is invariably insincere. Not particularly. You learn to disengage and to cease placing faith. It is more convenient in that manner." Mr. Whitman regarded her with a subdued intensity, his tone both gentle and resolute. "You possess intrinsic value, Celine. You possess greater strength than you realize. Your management of life's challenges is commendable. Most individuals would have succumbed by now. However, not you. You possess a unique form of strength." She experienced a constriction in her throat, however refrained from uttering anything further. She appreciated his remarks. However, a part of her questioned whether they stemmed merely from sympathy. She had consistently excelled at distinguishing between friendliness and charity. That evening, Daniel arrived late from a work trip. Celine was assisting Maria with her homework in the kitchen when she heard the front door open. Shortly thereafter, Daniel staggered into the corridor, his complexion ashen and his gaze vacant. His gait was shaky, and he appeared disoriented. "Daniel," Celine remarked, her tone laced with apprehension. Are you well? He did not reply promptly, then slumped against the wall, his hand grasping his head as if unable to endure its burden. Celine hurried towards him, her pulse pounding. She had never observed him in this manner. He appeared exceedingly vulnerable, in stark contrast to the self-assured, aloof individual he typically embodied. Daniel, she exclaimed with urgency. What is the matter? You have a high fever. He said something inaudibly, but she could not discern the words. Celine promptly proceeded to the kitchen, retrieved a damp towel, and returned to his side. She delicately positioned it on his forehead. However, his temperature was alarmingly elevated. She experienced a surge of panic in her chest. You require rest, she murmured gently, almost more to herself than to him. She assisted him into a chair and draped the blanket she had taken from the couch over him. She swiftly retrieved water, medicine, and a bowl of soup from the kitchen. Notwithstanding his initial reluctance, Daniel reclined and permitted her to attend to him. Celine perceived the warmth of his skin through the towel and observed how much more human he appeared, devoid of the arrogance and aloofness he typically exhibited. She remained beside him, vigilantly observing while he oscillated between wakefulness and slumber. As the night progressed, Daniel's fever started to subside, and Celine remained by his side, rearranging the blankets and dabbing the perspiration from his forehead. At a certain moment throughout the night, fatigue overwhelmed her, and she leaned on the edge of his bed. Her head gradually descended, and before she could prevent it, she succumbed to slumber, her cheek resting against the mattress's edge. By the early hours of the morning, Daniel's fever had finally subsided, and he gradually recovered consciousness. He blinked as the light from the window penetrated his fatigued eyes. He attempted to rise, but became immobilized upon noticing her asleep near him. Her hair was disheveled, and her hand remained positioned near his pillow. However, it was her appearance that astonished him. Her benevolence and authentic concern for him, despite all circumstances, prompted a transformation within him. He observed her for a moment, her rhythmic breathing soothing him in an unforeseen manner. She differed from the individuals in his realm, those who perpetually sought something from him. She exhibited selflessness. He had not comprehended the significance of that until this moment. As Celine shifted slightly, Daniel promptly sat upright, attempting to avoid disturbing her, yet his gaze remained fixed upon her. For the first time in an extended period, his heart was devoid of resentment or suspicion. She possessed an authenticity that he had not encountered in years. Subsequently that morning, following Celine's awakening and inquiry about him, Daniel remained largely reticent. He was still attempting to comprehend the emotions coursing throughout him. However, when he departed for work, he executed an unforeseen action. He discreetly facilitated Celine's employment at the local library, which he was aware had a vacancy. Although he did not explicitly state it was for her benefit, he inherently knew it was the appropriate course of action. Upon receiving the news from him later, Celine was astonished. What is the reason? What is the rationale behind your actions? Daniel's response was straightforward. Because you merit an opportunity, Celine. For the first time in an extended period, Celine sensed that perhaps, just perhaps, she was not as inconspicuous as she had previously believed. The early light permeated the expansive kitchen windows, illuminating the marble surfaces and gleaming silver fixtures. However, despite the tranquil sophistication, tension lingered beneath the surface. Celine entered the kitchen precisely as heated voices resonated. I arrived early due to additional preparation work, Clara retorted, crossing her arms. Sophia retorted, forcefully striking a spoon on the sink. You consistently behave as though you are the sole individual who cares. Cease your attempts to tarnish my reputation in the presence of Mr. Daniel. I did not make that statement. Halt, Celine articulated, her tone gentle yet resolute as she positioned herself between them. Both women gazed at her with astonishment. Shall we take a deep breath first? They remained silent. However, the tension in the atmosphere began to lessen marginally. I understand that situations can become stressful, Celine continued. However, both of you exert more effort than anyone I am acquainted with. Perhaps the focus should not be on identifying culpability, but rather on how we might cease inflicting harm upon one another. A prolonged silence ensued. Clara averted her gaze first. Sophia's shoulders drooped. Later that day, Clara approached Celine in the garden, cleaning her hands on her apron. You managed that more adeptly than I ever could. You possess something exceptional, Celine. Celine smiled timidly. I am acutely aware of the sensation of being overlooked. That evening, Daniel descended the stairs wearing a charcoal gray suit. Grandfather insists that you join us for the gala this evening, he stated, avoiding her gaze. It is a charitable occasion. You are his distinguished visitor. I'm not suited for environments of that nature, Celine whispered. Daniel gazed at her, and for an instant, his demeanor softened. He exhibits obstinacy when pursuing his desires and is infrequently incorrect. 2 hours later, Celine positioned herself at the periphery of the opulent ballroom, attired in a modestly borrowed gown. The chandeliers above glimmered like galaxies, and laughter reverberated across the marble flooring. She lowered her head, sensing the burden of the stairs. Soft murmurs trailed after her as she passed by. Is that the girl discovered on the street? She appears out of place. Perhaps she is a charity case. Celine's hands quivered, her breath halted. Daniel was conversing with a neighboring investor, but he observed. Upon hearing someone snicker, she likely does not even know which fork to use, he turned. He approached Celine directly and grasped her hand. Pay attention, he stated, his voice distinct and resonant. No individual possesses the authority to assess another's value based on appearance, origin, or financial status. The room fell silent. She is not present due to sympathy, Daniel remarked. She is present because she merits it. Celine gazed at him, astonished, uncertain if her heart raced from terror or an entirely different emotion. However, once the words resonated and the crowd dissipated, an overwhelming surge of emotion engulfed her. She took her leave, stepping onto the terrace into the rain that had commenced to fall. She was unaware of her tears until the frigid droplets mingled with them. Footfalls. A hand then made contact with her shoulder. No more. Daniel's voice was gentle behind her. What prompted you to do that? She said, now they will despise you as well. I am indifferent, he stated plainly. You fail to comprehend. I have spent my entire life being reminded of my insignificance. I'm not a part of this. Daniel positioned himself before her, his gaze intense with an unusual fervor. You are significant. You always have. Without delay, he embraced her. The rain intensified, drenching their garments, yet neither shifted. She grasped him as if he were a lifeline, and he held her as though he had awaited years to discover her. He bowed his head, and their lips connected in a kiss, gentle, exploratory, authentic. It was not a fantastical moment. There were no fireworks or gasps from onlookers, merely two fractured individuals discovering completeness in one another amidst the rain. I never realized I was valued this highly, she murmured against his chest. Daniel rested his chin atop her head. You possess even greater value. Within the ballroom, the festivities persisted, yet on the terrace, an alternate narrative commenced. The boardroom exuded an atmosphere of frigid glances and deliberate silence. Daniel occupied the head of the elongated mahogany table, fingers interlaced beneath his chin, as the chairman, an elderly man with piercing eyes, articulated his words slowly and distinctly. The chairman stated that major investors have expressed concerns regarding your public association with Celine. Daniel responded calmly, asserting that she is not merely some girl. Another board member interjected, emphasizing that she does not belong to their social sphere and that they have exerted considerable effort to uphold the company's reputation. If you persist in your association with her, Daniel, the board reserves the authority to initiate a vote regarding your dismissal as acting CEO. Daniel's jaw clenched. His existence had consistently been governed by rationality, heritage, and achievement. He had previously disregarded their murmurs, Yet now the stakes were tangible. That evening, he remained solitary in his office, the urban lights extending infinitely beyond the glass. He gazed at his phone, her contact illuminated on the display. He refrained from calling. The following morning, he discovered Celine in the estate's library, reading to the gardener's young son, both of them sharing quiet laughter. Upon noticing him, she smiled, and he felt the burden in his chest intensify. However, he remained silent regarding the ennui, the pressure, and the threats. Instead, he commenced his withdrawal. He ceased accompanying her for meals. He responded to her inquiries with brief nods. He maintained their dialogues at a superficial, habitual level. She observed this change. Naturally, she did. Celine refrained from asking. She did not implore or weep. Instead, she began to withdraw into herself once more. One evening, she prepared tea for him and discovered him in his study, lights dimmed, papers strewn across his desk. "I acknowledge my wrongdoing," she stated softly. "However, I am unaware of its nature. And if you simply state," Daniel averted his gaze, "you did nothing amiss, Celine, then why does it feel as though I am a stranger once more?" He rose abruptly and approached the window. "Because that is our reality." Her breath caught. "What?" "I believe it is time for you to depart the estate." It lay before her, more acute than a blade, more frigid than the rain beneath which they had once shared a kiss. Celine gazed at him. "Is that your desire?" Daniel shut his eyes. He yearned to shout no, yet uttered only yes. She refrained from weeping in his presence. She pivoted, ascended the stairs silently, and commenced packing. With trembling hands, she meticulously folded her scant possessions. The jumper he gifted her, the unfinished book, the scarf she donned on their initial encounter. Upon completion, she left a succinct note on the bedside table. "I never desired anything from you. Not your name, nor your wealth. Merely the tranquility I experienced in your presence. Thank you for providing me that, albeit briefly. Please be happy, Daniel." Upon Daniel's return to his room, she had departed. He discovered the note, seated himself on the bed's edge, and read it in silence. For the first time in years, Daniel Rowe, the man who never wept or wavered, succumbed to the silence. In the stillness of that expansive, opulent room, where so much had been constructed and safeguarded, a man finally comprehended the magnitude of his loss. Not a reputation, nor a position, but the sole entity that had ever rendered him genuinely alive. The bell above the library door chimed gently as Celine entered, the familiar aroma of aged books and ink enveloping her. It resembled an entrance into a serene, neglected recess of her spirit, a domain unscathed by heartbreak, pressure, or expectations. She returned not to conceal herself, but to initiate anew. She organized the children's section, arranged picture books, and reinstated the complimentary reading circle for children from the adjacent shelter. News disseminated rapidly. Miss Selina's back. Each afternoon, the modest room became populated with small shoes, eager gazes, and narratives that elevated spirits. She volunteered to instruct immigrant children in basic English and mathematics on weekends. Her only offerings were time, patience, and the conviction that kindness could transform lives. One afternoon, following a lesson, the head librarian summoned her. "There is a call for you," she stated. "It is from the university. They informed you that you applied for the Women's Community Scholarship." Celine was taken aback. "I did not anticipate this. You have been awarded it." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, tears welling in her eyes. She had never perceived herself as an academic. However, the future was no longer a source of trepidation. It became an opportunity to construct. That evening, she inscribed in her journal, "Only I determine my value. Neither my origins, nor my possessions, nor my abandonment define me." Weeks elapsed. Celine commenced attending evening classes. Her days were occupied with employment and academic pursuits. Her name gradually gained recognition among nonprofit organizations and educators. Her narrative began to spread. A young woman, previously misidentified as homeless, is now instructing children and pursuing a degree despite numerous challenges. One morning, a prominent lifestyle magazine released a feature article. The narrative of a girl who boarded the incorrect train and ultimately discovered her true self. Daniel inadvertently encountered the headline in a cafe adjacent to his workplace and fixated on the accompanying image. Celine sat on the library floor, a child resting in her lap, her smile gentle and luminous. His fingers quivered. He purchased every available copy. Upon returning to the estate, he confined himself to his study, unfolding the pages with the urgency of one striving to preserve a dream. He read every detail of her childhood in shelters, her odyssey through suffering, her newfound purpose, and subsequently, he wept. For the first time since her departure, the dam ruptured. It was not guilt that compelled him, but admiration. She had not merely endured in his absence. She had transcended his expectations. She had flourished. Later that evening, his grandfather entered his study. "I read it as well," the elderly man remarked, holding an object in his hand. Daniel gazed upward, his eyes still swollen with tears. "She left this behind," his grandfather remarked, setting a pale blue Celine scarf on the desk. "She would encircle it around her hands while experiencing anxiety." Daniel extended his hand, caressing it as if it were a revered object. "Are you aware of what I perceived in her?" the elderly guy inquired gently. "Not pity, not charity. I perceived fire and warmth in an individual who revitalized this frigid abode." Daniel remained silent, merely tightening his grip on the scarf. "You are allowing fear to deprive you of the greatest opportunity in your life," his grandfather murmured. "If you persist in this manner, she will not be the only one to suffer a loss." The room lapsed into silence once more, yet within Daniel's heart, a resolution had commenced, not stemming from remorse, but from affection, from the profound, unalterable realization that what he relinquished was never inferior to him. It encompassed all that he had been unaware he required. Now, he was determined to undertake any measures necessary to rediscover her. The university auditorium resonated with laughter, the clicking of cameras, and the rustling of gowns. Proud families filled the rows, grasping flowers and balloons, straining to locate their loved ones amidst the multitude of graduates. Celine stood among them, adorned in her cap and gown, her heart pulsating with disbelief and pride. The announcer proclaimed her name, Celine Grace Whitman. She advanced, head held high, her smile quivering. Her gaze traversed the crowd instinctively and halted. In the final row, motionless, stood Daniel. He donned no suit, merely a plain shirt and dark jeans. Yet his eyes conveyed profound depth. She nearly faltered as their gazes intertwined. He uttered no words, made no gestures, but remained steadfast and silent, akin to an unvoiced vow. Subsequent to the ceremony, he vanished. A week elapsed. Celine returned to her duties at the library. Each afternoon, she narrated tales to children, organized her forthcoming community class, and revised the manuscript for her book. Nevertheless, Daniel's unspoken presence persisted like an unanswered question. Then, on a rainy Thursday, he reappeared. The door creaked gently. She glanced up from the children's desk and saw him, drenched from the rain. Holding her scarf, her breath halted. "I apologize for arriving unexpectedly," he whispered softly. "I was uncertain if I would have the opportunity to converse with you." The room was devoid of occupants, except for them. The tempest outside dulled the external sounds. Celine rose gradually. Her heart accelerated, although her voice remained composed. "You discovered me," Daniel acquiesced. "I have perused your narrative. I have read every material. I observed from the rear at your graduation. I did not wish to spoil your day." Celine gulped audibly. "What is your purpose for being here?" He stated that he is not here to defend his actions. "You warranted transparency. However, I provided you with trepidation. I allowed external influences to dictate my affections, resulting in my loss of you." He approached, yet refrained from extending his hand towards her. "I aspired to exhibit courage for you. However, I exhibited cowardice. I permitted individuals unfamiliar with your essence to evaluate you. I did not exert sufficient effort in my struggle. However, my affection for you has remained unwavering. Celine's voice was scarcely audible. Why did you remain silent? I believed I lacked the authority, he confessed. I am present now, not to solicit your affection, but to request an opportunity to be in your proximity once more. However, that is contingent upon your willingness. Subsequently, he performed an action she never anticipated. Daniel knelt, not in supplication, but in capitulation. I am not requesting eternity, he stated, his voice faltering. I am merely requesting an opportunity to initiate the process of regaining your trust, to participate in your life in any capacity you permit, whether as a friend, a supporter, or a silent presence nearby. Celine's hands quivered. I am indifferent to the world's opinions, he continued. I am unconcerned about whether I manage another enterprise or dedicate my life to planting trees. As long as you recall, I was the individual you pardoned. That is sufficient. Tears cascaded down her face. She knelt before him and, wordlessly, enveloped him in her embrace. Daniel buried his face in her shoulder, clinging to her like a parched traveler who has suddenly discovered water in the desert. I remain angry, she whispered. I understand, he murmured. I'm still wounded. I merit that. Yet I never cease to miss you, she confessed, even when I despise that I did. They sat on the library floor, entwined. The rain gently tapped against the windows. The book rested silently on the shelves, and the clock appeared to decelerate, granting them the opportunity to breathe, to forgive, to commence anew. Within them, a fractured element was repaired, not flawlessly but authentically, for love, when reciprocated, is not invariably magnificent. At times, it humbly kneels, yearning for absolution. The sunlight gently permeated the foliage that sheltered the backyard of the Restart Library. Sparkling fairy lights were suspended between trees, and tables were adorned with wildflowers gathered by local children. There were no opulent chairs, no elaborate aisle, only benches, laughing, and the aroma of handmade pies cooling on adjacent windowsills. A year had elapsed since Celine and Daniel reunited. Since that time, Daniel had made a decision that astonished the business community. He distanced himself from boardrooms and media attention to assume the role of co-director at the community library they established together. Gone are the tailored suits and power lunches. His days were now occupied with repairing shelves, coordinating book drives, and instructing unemployed veterans in coding. Celine, exuding newfound confidence, emerged as a guiding light in the neighborhood. Her book, The Day I Took the Wrong Train But Found the Right Life, had surreptitiously ascended bestseller lists. More significantly, it had transformed lives. Daily correspondence flooded in. Women who exited shelters, adolescents who summoned the courage to apply for college, and isolated individuals who regained hope due to her prose. Today marked their wedding. The attendees comprised frequently overlooked individuals, street musicians, librarians, elderly women from the corner store, and children who once resorted to theft for sustenance, but now read at night. There was no media presence or fashion publications, only authentic individuals with genuine narratives, all united by the subtle enchantment that Celine and Daniel had infused into their lives. Celine donned a modest white dress that danced in the wind. Her hair was embellished with small daisies, gathered that morning by a young girl named Lily. Daniel awaited beneath a wooden arch they had constructed together from salvaged planks and painted with local children. He appeared no different from any man in love, except his smile bore the burden of every obstacle they had overcome. The ceremony was brief and sincere. During the exchange of vows, neither party attempted to be lyrical. They simply pledged to remain committed, to endure challenges, to engage in fair conflict and frequent forgiveness, and to love with awareness. When the officiant declared, "You may kiss the bride," applause resonated more powerfully than any orchestra. Subsequently, as cake was distributed and children frolicked barefoot on the grass, a soft voice tugged at Celine's dress. "Ava, a young girl whom Celine had instructed in reading the previous year, had been forsaken at a train station and subsequently taken in by a nearby foster home. Clutching a hand-drawn card, she gazed up with her large, tear-filled eyes. "Miss Celine," she uttered, her voice quivering. "You're not a princess." Those in proximity halted, perplexed by the child's statement. "No, I'm not. Yet, you are my miracle. Now, I no longer experience nightmares, as I have come to understand the existence of kindness in the world," Daniel observed, suppressing the lump in his throat. Celine embraced the young girl firmly. "You are the miracle, Ava. You." Thus emerged the sixth crescendo, not in drama or spectacle, but in authenticity, in the serene realization that love, when embodied, transforms into a sanctuary. The healing that is shared amplifies. Later that evening, as the stars emerged and the music diminished, Daniel and Celine sat on the library steps, observing their chosen family revel and dance beneath the fairy lights. "We will never attain perfection," Celine remarked, her head resting on his shoulder. Daniel kissed the crown of her head. "But we are authentic. That is sufficient," she murmured. Behind them, the library sign emitted a gentle glow. "The Restart Library, a sanctuary for new beginnings." Under that illumination, two individuals, once adrift, sat adjacent to one another, not as saviors, nor as survivors, but as collaborators in a life reconstructed from fragmented remnants, united by volition, compassion, and affection. In that moment, the world seemed perfectly aligned. "We appreciate your companionship throughout this odyssey of suffering, bravery, and recovery." Celine's narrative commenced with an erroneous train and a heart burdened by adversity. Yet, in the most unforeseen circumstances, she discovered not only compassion, but also a new direction, a new family, and an unconditional love that refrained from condemning her history. Her narrative serves as a poignant reminder that even in moments of disorientation, we may be merely one step away from attaining all that we have ever desired. If this account resonated with you, evoking the notion that every fractured element can contribute to a greater beauty, kindly share it with someone in need of hope today. Additionally, remember to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and activate the notification bell to ensure you never overlook a tale that could mend your heart, inspire your path, or reaffirm that love persists in the most tranquil corners. Until we meet again, continue to have faith in second opportunities,